Okay, good evening, everybody. I'd like to welcome this evening Paddy Waldron, who he's going to speak to us on matters related to collaborative genealogy. Paddy has degrees in mathematical science, economics and finance, and has been a lecturer and visiting research fellow in economics at Trinity College Dublin. More recently, he has specialised in local history genealogy, especially genealogy. He has been permanent Council of Irish Genealogical Organisations, Chairman of the Clare Root Society, and Public Relations Officer for the Kilrush and District Historical Society since 2012. He has published in various journals, and on St. Patrick's Day this year, he was appointed a Companion of the Clans of Ireland Order of Merit. So we welcome Paddy here this evening and look forward to what he has to say.
Thank you, Grania. Do I have to talk in the dark?
No, because we have to trust people. We need that. There's no problem.
I prefer to leave it on. I gave Grania a choice of two topics that I might talk about tonight, and she said she'd like me to talk about genealogy or DNA. So I said I'd give a talk that I have given different versions of elsewhere, and we'll be giving versions of again, about collaborative genealogy, and talk about the advantages and shortcomings of the various candidates for the ideal online family tree. If you want to look at my notes afterwards, they're on my own website. The only note you really need to write down is pwaldron.info/Murroe with a capital M. I don't know whether the Wi-Fi password is a capital M or a small m, but my website is a capital M. And we're being recorded live on YouTube. I don't think there's anybody actually watching us, but some people have said they'd like to watch back afterwards. Grania said I have degrees in economics in the dim and distant past, so I'm going to talk a little about the economics of the DNA industry. Then I'll ask a few questions to the audience to see what sort of experience you have in all these things. And then I'll talk about matching up your DNA with your family trees, and I'll talk about my latest favorite, greatest DNA website or genealogy website, wikitree.com. Give you a few examples of using it, and I have a long list of further reading for those of you who do decide to use it to introduce you to the more advanced treatments. So I brought along a piece of my very oldest family tree. My father worked in the forecourts, and there was all this high-quality legal paper with obsolete forms, and he brought it home, and he said, that would be great for writing family trees on the back of. So there is my handwritten family tree with what I knew of my Keys relatives about 50 years ago. Am I that old? It was held together by sellotape. Sellotape does not last for 50 years. You can see a little bit hanging off. But the high-quality legal paper is still high-quality legal paper. A lot of people write their family trees on rolls of wallpaper, or used to do before computers came along. Somebody told me lately they'd seen a 65-foot-long roll of wallpaper with a big family tree on it. But things changed in the 1980s. We had desktop personal computers that were a lot bigger than these. My first PC had a huge hard drive, 10 megabytes. You get one single file, a high-quality image will be more than 10 megabytes. But in 1987, I was introduced to what was then called Personal Ancestral File. I should have opened up my current version called Ancestral Quest, just to show you what it looks like today. Back in 1987, all we had was, and it's even opened up the Keys file instead of my own file. So I think these are probably some of Grania's ancestors. You can fill in a pedigree chart like that on your computer. You can have various different views. So that's what has evolved from the DOS version of the 1980s. In the 1990s, we had the World Wide Web. Sometime in the mid-90s, people realized all this family tree information on our PCs, on our desks, we can put it on the internet. And by the end of the 1990s, or certainly the early 2000s, people realized we can actually write our family trees directly onto websites rather than onto our hard drives on our own computers. Then the turn of the millennium came along and genetic genealogy emerged. Family tree DNA in Texas discovered that you could actually commercialize the analysis of a man's Y chromosome, a tiny little bit of DNA that is passed unchanged, almost unchanged from father to son, in the same way as the surname follows from father to son. So we had surname studies and people trying to figure out, are all the Keys families in the world descended from a common ancestor? Are all the Keys families in County Limerick descended from a common ancestor? So my dear cousin Cindy, whose mother was a Keys, came over from America in the 90s, decided she was going to solve this problem and link up all the Keys families in Limerick. We didn't have ready access to Y-DNA comparison back in the 90s when she started this. So she found Grania, she found Paddy Keys here in Murroe, fell in love with both of them and said, I want to be related to you. About 20 years later, we finally proved with Y-DNA we're not related. At least not through a common Keys ancestor, but we may be related equally far back through some other common ancestor. By the 2010s, the next decade, the genetic genealogy world had moved on, and now the DNA companies were able to analyze all of our DNA. We each have 23 pairs of chromosomes. 22 pairs are what are called autosomal DNA. Each pair contains one chromosome from the father and one from the mother. The Y chromosome that had been analyzed a decade earlier is one of the 23rd pair, the sex chromosomes. A man has a Y chromosome and one X chromosome, a woman has two X chromosomes. So as the companies like Ancestry and MyHeritage and 23andMe boomed, we had a lot more reason to compare our family trees to see if we explain our DNA matches. Your autosomal DNA will match you with anyone who's closer than your third cousin. It'll match you with about 90% of your third cousins, with about 50% of your fourth cousins, about 10% of your fifth cousins, with a small percentage of your sixth and seventh and eighth cousins. But we all have literally millions of sixth and seventh and eighth cousins. So we get lots of DNA matches where we can't figure out the common ancestor. Maybe we could if we lived in a jurisdiction like French Canada or somewhere where there are great parish records going back into the 1600s. In Ireland, most of the population was Catholic and living through the penal laws and not able to keep proper birth, marriage, and death records. Not that the Catholic Church was ever interested in keeping death records because death and burial was not a sacrament, the death records are the sacraments. So we have ended up with a multitude today of rival DNA comparison websites. And if we're using all of them, we end up with a multitude of duplicate and sometimes conflicting online family trees. And the question is, what do we do about making life easier? So from the 80s, I was an advocate of keep everything on your own computer, keep control of your own backups. Don't be fretting about whether you have good internet or not. I'm fretting for the last hour whether this YouTube recording is working because this dongle here mightn't be strong enough. But I have now realized that my database has grown so large, 250,000 people put together in the last 38 years. My life expectancy has reduced by 38 years. My views have changed on time management and delegation and collaboration. And I've decided it's time to stop reinventing the wheel. So before I tell you more detail where I think things are going to go in the next decade, let me just give a general economic overview of what I think is happening. There's still a lot of pure research going on in terms of internet and in terms of DNA and genetics. There are lots of new discoveries coming out of this, and new discoveries coming out of the work of historians and genealogists doing pure research interested in accuracy. There are lots of big companies out there who want to make a profit. Most of us historians and genealogists want accuracy in the long term rather than profit. Most of the website operators that we're relying on want short-term profit and don't care whether what they're selling is accurate or not. So what's going to happen? Is accuracy going to win, or is greed going to win? We hear about artificial intelligence all over the place these days. Artificial intelligence uses feedback loops to learn from past mistakes. The genealogy companies don't seem to be learning from their mistakes. They don't seem to be looking for their users and researchers and historians about what mistakes other researchers might have made. There's a lot of real intelligence in this room and elsewhere. It's not being used by the ancestries and the MyHeritages of this world as a feedback mechanism to teach them what they're getting wrong. I hope that those in the artificial intelligence world will attack the task of compiling family trees using artificial intelligence. It's a lot easier to compile a family tree than to teach a computer the English language. There's a lot fewer variables than there is in the English language. And hopefully we'll have some sort of artificial intelligence to help us to break down our genealogical brick walls. So ultimately what's been happening in the last 4 or 5 decades is the integration of traditional old-fashioned genealogy, DNA comparisons, and now artificial intelligence. And that's going to get tighter, I hope, in the next decade. That's my prediction. I may be wrong. If you're interested in surname studies like a Key study or a Waldron study or a Donovan study, there have always been surname projects. Family Tree DNA, the company that started out analyzing the Y chromosome, has 12,170 projects, mostly surname projects. So I asked it today, did it have a KEAYS project? It doesn't. It has a KEY project, and that covers many variants of the surname. It also has various geographical projects that include key as a surname. But I think if we click on that link, it will give us a list of all the surnames covered by the project. It includes KEYES, which is common in Ireland, KEAS, which is how my ancestors signed their names in 1833 on the Tíre folk in the church, alongside where Tom Donovan here lives. It doesn't even include KEAYS or KEAYES. We must try and get them on the list. But we have a few local members of the Keys family in that project. The Guild of One Name Studies, exactly when that started, relatively recently, maybe in the 70s. It's based in Britain. It's running 2,000 plus surname studies. And here in Ireland, we have Clans of Ireland, which already got a mention, which has clans, many of which have associated surname projects for DNA projects. Boyle, Carty, Connolly. He is one. I'm involved in, which is a big gathering coming up in June. I don't see any Donovan in there. And all it takes is, I think, 6 adults with a surname to register a clan and pay a couple of €100 in fees to Clans of Ireland if you want to get involved. So a little bit more economics is the competition we have between the many DNA companies and genealogy companies and websites, healthy or unhealthy. You hear a lot about healthy competition in the news, but it's not healthy competition if it's encouraging the dissemination of wrong information. Is that it's healthy competition if it forces the prices down. And the prices have come down dramatically in the last 2 decades. There's one company, Y-DNA comparison for surname studies, it's still charging $300 or $400 for Y-DNA analysis. There's half a dozen companies doing autosomal DNA comparison. They will get you in for $40 or less if you shop around and make the same prices. I don't know whether that's a consequence of the economics, the competition, or a consequence of the science of actually extracting the information, the DNA. I came up with what I call Murphy's Law of Genetic Genealogy. I was contacted a few years ago by a Mrs. Murphy, and she was adopted. And she was trying to find her birth family. And she had her DNA on 5 of these 6 websites. She wasn't on 23andMe.com. After a couple of years, we eventually persuaded her she should speak for 23andme.com. Her full brother had been on 23andme.com all the time and she'd missed it. Eventually, she made contact. So people ask, what is the best website for DNA analysis? There's a couple of answers I can give. The best one is the one that the person you're looking for is using. So you have to use them all to be sure you find the other person. And the second answer is the best one is the one that has the most people that you can be compared with and that can find you most members of your family. That for many years now has been Ancestry.com, which is up to 5 million DNA samples analysed and available for comparison. But with my economist hat on, I say, surely hosting a DNA comparison database must be a natural monopoly. You don't want to have to go to 6 places. You don't want to have to be dealing with Murphy's Law. And there may be some consolidation between these companies. All been in the news this week. You probably heard that 3andMe filed for bankruptcy protection on Sunday. It's for sale as a going concern. I'm not sure that the liquidator or receiver, or what the person is called in the States, happy with the Attorney General in California, said everyone should delete their data immediately from 23andMe because that will destroy the value of the company if it doesn't have any data. There was a partnership in Britain between Find My Past and Living DNA from about 2018 to 2023. Living DNA has never caught up with the American companies. It's a fraction, 2% maybe of the size of Ancestry.com. And it's very slow rolling out the genealogy tools that it promises. So Find My Past got fed up and ended this partnership a couple of years ago. The companies that are thriving, though, I've learned another economic lesson. Selling annual subscriptions is more profitable than selling one-off products. So now, Ancestry in particular insists on you paying them an ongoing subscription at any value out of your DNA. And it's like the mobile phone companies. They give you a free phone as long as you subscribe at 30 euros or 60 euros a month or whatever. The DNA companies are heading for that pricing model. Like charity collectors who knock at your door and say, if you say, I need to tell it. Oh no, we can't take cash. Your bank details are an ongoing subscription for the rest of your life. So that's the way the world is going. All these DNA analysis, the first Y-DNA comparisons 25 years ago started looking at 12 markers on the Y chromosome. They're now looking at hundreds of thousands of markers on the Y chromosome. There are like 3 billion markers across all the chromosomes. Even the autosomal companies are looking at less than 1 million out of 3 billion. But it is now possible to do whole genome sequencing, which reads every single bit of every chromosome. 98% or something of that is, I think 99.8% of it is identical across all human beings. 98% of something is identical across all the primates and chimpanzees and orangutans. But it's still better to look at all of it than look at 0.001%. There's 0.2% that might be genealogically informative. But it hasn't taken off. It's doable for a couple of $100, but it hasn't taken off for genealogical comparisons because all these big companies have done so much investment into what was state of the art 15 years ago and what's now becoming obsolete. So I'm waiting. It was predicted that 2 or 3 years ago, whole genome sequencing would be used for comparison. It hasn't happened yet. It may happen in the years to come. So I think in an ideal world, all our DNA would be on a single website. And there would be some regulator to ensure that we weren't being ripped off by the company running it. The same applies for our family tree research. If we're for our cousins that we have DNA matches with, we'll have millions of people in our DNA data, in our genealogy databases, and we should have it all in one collaborative online single world tree. The bizarre thing about this is there are 4 of these. For example, familysearch.org, run by the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, known to many as the Mormon Church. I set up the Genealogical Society of Utah many decades ago, went around the world microfilming records. So we have a lot to be grateful to them for. They've microfilmed things like the Registry of Deeds, and they're now using artificial intelligence to decipher 18th century handwriting on microfilmed records from the Registry of Deeds. But they also have a single world tree. There's my pedigree chart with my parents, grandparents, and I can click over here to expand and show great grandparents and so on. At a time. There's also Genie.com. Genie.com was taken over by MyHeritage in 2012, I think. It's a bit slower to load up than Family Search because it's owned by a commercial enterprise. It has a different objective to a church-owned or a volunteer-owned website. There was some credential stuffing, as it's called, on websites a couple of years ago, and they all got paranoid and forced people to change their passwords, etc. Genie.com looked at anyone who had an out-of-date email address, whose email address had changed since they signed up. Trying to change, I got logged out. I had to sign up again. I ended up having 2 copies of me, despite the objective being to have one profile for everyone in the world. And they wanted me to pay to merge the old me and the new me, which isn't going to work. WeRelate.org was one of the first of these set up. 2005. It still exists, but it's tiny. But the one that seems to work the best is Wikitree.com. And the second half of this talk will be largely about what we can do with Wikitree.com. A story from Wikipedia. There is what my profile looks like on Wikitree. Whole screen there. There is my pedigree chart with myself at the left, my parents in the second column, 4 grandparents in the third column, 8 great-grandparents in the fourth column, 16 great-great-grandparents in the fifth column, and there's lots more on the page. Away my birthday. There's a biography section, a sources section, a photo section, a DNA section, various other bits and pieces, lots on my genealogical interests, which kind of clutters up the screen a bit. And then there are genealogy tabs, family, just parents, children, ancestors. And if I had descendants, there would be a descendants tab there. I don't have any descendants, so they hide the descendants tab. So again, I said hosting DNA is like a natural monopoly. Hosting a single world tree surely is also a natural monopoly. But the objective is to have a single accurate tree, an editable tree, so we can change mistakes. I probably did, but my cousins won't have to when they come along after me. I was probably the one who created the profiles for me.
Family search and put it on Wikitree.
You can, but it's I'll talk about that a little bit later on. There are lots of tricks and shortcuts for copying information from one of these websites to another. I'll show you some of the DNA connections later on as well. So there are lots of ideals that I've talked about. None of what I'm calling the legacy websites have succeeded in simultaneously all of the goals. But there are genealogists from here in Murroe, I'll talk about a few later on, and around the world, contributing to bringing about the ideal collaborative tree, and I'm going to teach you how to join it. And you can see what sort of experience we have in the room. Who has not yet started recording their own family tree? A couple of you, 3 of you. Time to get started. How many different electronic versions do you think you should have to maintain? 1? More than 1? 1 is enough. As many as there are DNA websites, there isn't enough time in the world for that. How do you record the master copy? It better be a master copy, because if you're forced to keep multiple copies, you don't want to be making the changes in one to today and then another one tomorrow and not know which to connect in the live and the complete version. Who's still using pen and paper exclusively for their family trees? You said a minute ago you weren't doing it. You have a handwritten one. Who's using word processing and spreadsheet software? Nobody. Who's using standalone genealogy software like Ancestral Quest? A couple of you. Who's using one of the genealogy websites like MyHeritage or Ancestry or Tribal Pages? The same people are using the standalone. Hopefully you're uploading rather than entering everything in duplicate. Who's making regular backups of their work? Good. I'm going to make a backup when I get home tonight. I've been busy for the last few weeks. So are you willing to collaborate by making compromises with controlling the family tree database, with sharing the workload, with trusting other people to be as accurate as you are, with the speed of data entry by doing it online rather than offline? I've got older, but my database has got bigger and my life expectancy's got shorter. I'm more willing to make those compromises. And the way these single world trees operate, the first part of the philosophy is it's not your tree or my tree, it's our tree. We're all working together. We all have the same ancestors if we go back enough hundreds of years. I have estimated that any two Irish people who don't have recent immigrant ancestors are very unlikely to be more distant than about 10th or 12th cousins. If you narrow that down to county, I'm sure very unlikely to find people who are not 7th or 8th cousins. If you narrow it down to a parish, in a remote rural parish, everybody 4th or 5th cousins to each other. But there will be duplicates in these trees. You have to try and eliminate them, merge them. There will be errors. The way Ancestry and MyHeritage work is Ancestry and Muintir is quite explicit when you signed up. Start entering your family. If you don't know, just guess. And then they take those guesses and they read those guesses to the next wave of innocents who come along, right or wrong. So a mistake that one person makes can go completely viral. The alternative is the collaborative tree where somebody makes a mistake, the next person spots the mistake and for free can correct it, provided they have a source and they document the source. Family search doesn't really work well because, as I said, the Genealogical Society of Utah, as it started out, has collected millions, billions of records around the world, and it's bunging all these records into the family tree. So it'll take a family of 10 children born in Abington in the 1860s, and 10 baptism records. That's 10 children, 10 fathers, 10 mothers. It'll make 30 profiles on the tree. But the problem with that is 10 of them are the father repeated, 10 of them are the mother repeated, and they expect you and me to come along and do all the merging afterwards. Genie.com, as said already, is to make money. Wikitree, I think, is the most emphasis on integrating with the DNA websites. Genie.com does a little bit of DNA integration as well. But there are two other big one world trees that are not editable. They're run by the two biggest DNA companies, Ancestry and MyHeritage. Ancestry is selling what I call through lines and common ancestor hints, doing that by harvesting the family trees that are donated by all their users and trying to stitch them together into their own single world tree behind the scenes, riddled with mistakes. I'll show you a few in a minute, with no way for any of their users to correct the mistakes. But there is a way. I'll show you that and explain why it's not working. MyHeritage is a similar thing called theories of family relativity. I'll show you more mistakes than that. So ultimately, we all want to link our pedigree charts to our DNA kit. And eventually we find a new cousin and we'll be able to link together two family trees that previously weren't linked. We want both sides of that DNA match. We have to go and do exactly the same work on each of many websites. No, thank you. We'd rather just one person have to do the work on just one website. if you have your DNA on one of these websites and you don't do your family tree, it's next to useless for your matches. You have to at least show one generation of your deceased ancestors, because most of them want living people to be kept private. And then you have some chance if you see one generation of deceased ancestors of a match, of doing your own research and working back and finding out where is your common ancestor. If you're enthusiastic, you'll have 10 generations of your ancestors if the records are available, or in this part of the world, we're looking to have 5 or 6 generations of their ancestors. So why do I like wikitree.com? It has benefits that none of the others have. It doesn't have the drawbacks that I've already mentioned. I tell people it's just like Wikipedia for genealogists. Everybody's heard of Wikipedia. Anyone can go in and edit a Wikipedia article. For some reason, but most people can get around that. Some journalists lift things off Wikipedia, might say in a newspaper article, Wikipedia is wrong. And if they're lazy, they leave it wrong. If they're good journalists, they correct Wikipedia and document their sources. Wikipedia works the same way. It's basically crowdsourced genealogy. The genealogists are largely volunteers. There's only about a dozen paid staff. Most of the programmers are volunteer programmers. Code is open source, and the genealogy data is open source. It's been around since 2008. It links with GetMatch, MitoYDNA, even 23andMe, other DNA websites. Will it outlive you and I? Nobody knows how long a website will live. Nobody knows how long a human being will live. Will our research outlive us if we keep it on a hard drive and hide the hard drive and don't tell anyone the password and don't write in our will what will happen? And die as well. Wikitree is promised to be 100% free. It's funded to some extent by advertising. If you sign up, sign the honor code, you don't have to look at the advertisements anymore. And that seems to keep it going. And there are trusts and funds in place to keep it going forever, which you can read about on that page. So I probably wandered off my script. I think I said a lot of that. How big is it? As of yesterday, it had 336,420 profiles. Hopefully, that many different people. There will be some duplicates in there that haven't been recognized yet. About 35 million of those are related by blood or by marriage to each other. There's a lovely connection finder, which I'll show you to show you how many degrees you are away from anybody else who's connected to the main tree. But the other companies persist in using artificial stupidity. Here's an example of ancestry DNA suggests to me for my maternal family tree from County Mayo. I know that my mother was born in a little place called Culmore, between Spinford and Charlestown, where a house was built on the land that had been owned by her great-grandfather, James Durkin. I have his death certificate from 1865. It says he was 87 or 88 years of age. If the age is correct, he was born in 1777. Ancestry hints that his mother wasn't born until 1789. Maybe the age is off by 30 years or so on the death certificate, but I'd rather believe the age in the death certificate than believe that Ancestry's error-written system is giving me a great-great-great-grandmother that. And he, under this, 28 years older than his next brother. So that's the quality of the hints we're getting from Ancestry. But Ancestry has generated a tree checker. There's lots of good bloggers writing about what's going on in DNA world. I was talking about Ancestry's tree checker. It's a premium tool. You have to pay them an extra subscription if you want them to find your mistakes. My heritage is similar. It's given me 61 theories of family relativity. 9 of them are people that already appear in my family tree. So it's just giving me back information that I've already given it. 13 of them I've actually confirmed as correct. 39, 75%, I have rejected. thought I had gotten rid of some of them. You can mark them as rejected, but you can't get them to go away altogether. And some of them are based on a ridiculous error that occurred years ago. A friend of mine invited me to view a family tree that his brother had put together. And somehow I got linked on that family tree to my friend's ex-wife. And all my hints about my ancestors are based on the pedigree of the ex-wife of my friend. So the first one is correct, kind of correct. That is my first cousin, not my half-aunt. And we'll review that DNA match, just confirm that. She's 23 years to the day older than me. DNA cannot distinguish between a half-aunt and a first cousin. They will share the same amount of DNA on average. But the DNA in my heritage thinks she's my half-aunt. When I scroll down to the theory of family relativity part, it agrees with me that she's my first cousin. The two sides of my heritage don't talk to each other. I think the two sides of ancestry don't talk to each other. All of you surely out there to integrate the DNA side and the family tree side. It's not happening. And one more. I'm guessing that this person I don't recognize is not my relation at all. Hang on. The theory of family relativity isn't even coming up at the top where it's supposed to come up. There it is. Oh yeah, view full theory. It hides it a little bit when I reject it. It's actually based on my real mother, but it's confused the early generations of the Durkins again. But there are others there that still think my mother is a Roach rather than a Durkin because of an error made many years ago. So how are we for time? Too bad, but I want to show you a little bit more. How bad can it get? Brigham Young was one of the famous early Mormons. Here is his Wikitree profile. The Mormons believed in polygamy back in those days. So on essentially the family page opens, you have his parents, you have his 12 siblings, a reasonable family for the time. Then it doesn't number his wives, 1 page, 2 pages, 3 pages, 4 pages, 5 pages. Married about 50 wives, many of them on a single day. It does number his children. By all of those wives, he had 57 children. How many profiles do you think you might have on Ancestry? It was 13,201 when I checked yesterday. How many of those have documented sources? How many are correct? It's got better. It's down to 13,134 today. I don't want to have to go through 10 profiles, let alone 404 or 13,000 profiles to find who people think Brigham Young's ancestors were. So how do we use Wikitree? The sign-up form is very simple. Because I'm logged in this window, open in the private window just to show you all at once. Your first name, your last name at birth. The convention is that everyone is identified by their last name at birth, and then you can add any number of other surnames of multiple spouses, or spelling variants of the original last name at birth. You have a password, an email address. You have to be 16 years or older or 13 with parental permission, and you cannot add children under 13 unless they're your own children. You can't even add your grandchildren, as I discovered. And you just have to prove in a couple of ways that you're not a robot and you're up and running. But you don't get very much with that guest account. You still have to look at the advertisements, which you can upgrade to a family member account that allows you to communicate with the other users of Wikitree. And you can then upgrade all for free to a Wiki genealogist account. To do that, you have to accept an honor code. I don't think many people would disagree with any points of the code. We collaborate, we care about accuracy. assume that mistakes are unintentional. Very easy to confuse two William Keys living at the same time in adjoining parishes, probably both married to other Keys. Exactly. I hope I've got them all straight in the few that I've added in the last few days. We try to be courteous. We respect privacy. It's really just for deceased people plus active genealogists. We respect copyrights, which is reasonable. We give credit. We cite our sources. And we hope to keep information as free and open as possible. Some people will say that's pie in the sky, utopian ideal. Some people will say it might be achievable. Some people will say at least it's worth trying. And once you've done that, you can edit any profile that has open privacy. There are a number of levels of privacy which we'll come to in a second. But when you go back before 1700, because sources are scarce and people who lived before 1700 have so many more descendants alive today competing to edit them, there's a slightly stricter self-certification process to allow you to edit those. If you want to edit people who lived before 1500, not many of us can go back that far with our ancestors, there is a stricter certification process which I haven't even gone through yet. So everyone gets an ID consisting of the last name at birth and a number corresponding to how many people of that surname were on Wikitree before you. So I was the 201st Waldron who signed up many years ago. I didn't start to use it much until many years after that. If you want to learn more, there are question and answer sessions for new members on Zoom. Next one is 1 in the morning, but there's 2 a month, and one of them is at a reasonable Irish time. The other one is reasonable Irish time for night owls like myself, and maybe Tom Donovan here, and more of us. If you wait a couple of weeks, there'll be one in the daytime. The 7 levels of privacy that I mentioned are unlisted, which means you're just called Living Waldron, Living Keys, or Living Donovan, and no other information is revealed, nothing about dates or parents or anything. You can be private. You can be private with a public biography, private with a public family tree, private with biography and family tree, public, but not editable by anyone else, and open, in which case anyone who has signed the honor code can edit. Anyone who was born more than 150 years ago or died more than 100 years ago has to be open. So you can control, to some extent, your close relatives, but not your distant ancestors. They have to be open. But every profile also has a trusted list. So rather than letting every registered wiki genealogist edit it, you can decide for your closer and more recent relatives, you'll only let your immediate family edit it, people you trust. So it's a nice balance as well. Somebody asked, can you upload everything at once? You can. GEDCOM is a standard for storing genealogical information that all the software companies have tried to agree on for many years. There are different variants of GEDCOM, but if you have your family tree somewhere else, you can export it into a GEDCOM file, upload it to Wikitree, run a system called GEDCompare, which checks which people in your file are already on Wikitree and talks you through how to merge the ones that are already there and add the ones that are not there yet. But do it with a small file if you decide to do it. And I'm happy to help anyone who I'm convinced that it's worth doing. DNA features. Active members can link their DNA information to themselves, and it then propagates up and down the tree. I'll show you examples in a minute. For a deceased person, you can have DNA information as well, because there's no privacy implications there. If you have another cousin who you've persuaded to swap, they're expected to open their own Wikitree account under their own email address, add the DNA information, and they don't have to do anything else. Basically, that's our interpretation of GDPR. I showed you my profile, right? Let me show you my DNA section. There are my DNA connections. I have 9 of them, probably including myself. Naturally, I share my Y chromosome with myself. I share my mitochondrial DNA, which is the part of DNA that comes from the mother and the mother's mother and the mother's mother's mother and so on with myself. I share myself of my own DNA. Then the next three people on the list are three first cousins. On my mother's side, we're all first cousins to each other. We all share 12.5% of our DNA with each other. The next one, who shares only 1.56%, is my half second cousin. She's also my fourth cousin because our great grandfather married twice and he had two wives who were first cousins. And then the next one is a third cousin, and the next one is a second cousin twice removed, the last of my grandmother's generation, who sadly died a couple of years after she swabbed for the DNA companies for me. So we go back up the tree, and we go back up to my Keys ancestor. Where's my pedigree tab gone? There's my ancestor tab, and my Keys ancestor is through Catherine Parker. So there's John Keys, who's my confirmed great grandfather. And cousin Cindy has decided that James Keys, who was living in the same area about a generation earlier, is probably John's father. You can mark parent-child relationships as either confirmed with DNA, certain, uncertain. So the question mark in the yellow box means that it's uncertain whether he's the father of John. Either way, if we go to James's profile, we go to the DNA section, we see that he has a descendant called Henry who has my DNA results, a probable descendant called Henry. I look at the relationship between him and Henry, and you have Cindy and myself are also on there as descendants who share autosomal DNA, but because we're not Keys males, Cindy has a Keys mother, I have a Keys great-great-great-grandmother. We don't share the Y chromosome. That shows us the relationship between Henry and James, and you see the little question mark there to say that the last generation is still questionable, and we should really fill in DNA confirmations all the way back along, but I haven't done that yet. So he's the fifth great grandson. What about Brian Boher? The O'Briens claim they're the oldest surname of the world. Brian Boher was killed at the Battle of Clontarf in 1014. O'Brien means grandson of Brian. The pedigree from Brian Boher down to the present day is very well documented. We get down to DNA connections. You might have heard of Conor O'Brien, Lord Inchiquin, who died a couple of years ago, who was very enthusiastic about genetic genealogy, even though he didn't know whether it would confirm or refute his 28th generation pedigree back to Brian Boher, but it seems to have confirmed it. His matches are all O'Briens, apart from the dynasty of O'Dees, which I discovered a few years ago. But there is still, to the present day, a tradition in the O'Dees that the O'Briens and the O'Dees in the Middle Ages used to foster each other's children. So what obviously happened was an O'Brien child was fostered with the O'Dees, ended up with the O'Dea surname. So there are two distinct Y-DNA signatures for O'Dees in County Clare. So I call the ones that are descended from Brian Boher the Royal O'Dees, and I call the others the real O'Dees. They're all happy. So if we click on the find relationship icon, we see that Brian Boher was the 28th great-grandfather in the male line of Conor Miles John, the deceased Baron Inchiquin. His second cousin, I think, is also Conor, is the new Baron Inchiquin. And the other thing, since we're in this part of the world, go back and we look at Lord Inchiquin's profile. He is marked as being notable because of his title and his pedigree. And the manager of his profile is Dennis O'Brien, who worked with Conor and a few other O'Briens around the world on the O'Brien surname DNA project and O'Brien Crown gatherings and so on. And we're in this part of the world. Dennis is in Australia, and his pedigree with his father, whose ties to the extent it only displays his decade of birth and death. His grandfather is open, was born in Australia. His great-grandfather was born in Rathtownland, Abington Parish, Limerick, Ireland. So Dennis is a regular visitor to these parts, tracing his O'Brien roots, as well as tracing the Royal O'Briens. What we look at next? Yes, we've already looked at my James Keys. Here's William Keys of, when I say Abington, who I just added today. Does he have? I don't think he's Drumkeen. I think
Who's his wife?
I didn't even put in his wife, and I don't know the Keys pedigree off by heart. But that had actually disappeared earlier in the day. It's now come back, but because I just added him today, he has, because everything updates on different cycles, some things update instantly when you change them, some things update every 5 minutes, some things every hour, some things every 24 hours. If you come back to William tomorrow, he will have DNA information. But if we go to his son John, John was of Drumkeen. These are Paddy's ancestors, yeah. They don't, his DNA information is not propagated yet, but if we come down to John II, I put in his biography, there's a wonderful browser extension that will make a little table like that off the National Archives census website and stick it into the biography. His DNA information won't propagate until tomorrow. Down to John III, who went in first because we started with Paddy and we worked backwards. And John has the same Y DNA as Paddy, and his Y group is BY18965. Each mutation that's discovered on the Y chromosome gets an identifier, which basically consists of a couple of letters saying who discovered it, and a number saying roughly in what order it was discovered. So that was the 18,965 fifth mutation discovered by family tree DNA through their big Y analysis. And family tree DNA, only discovered recently, has this wonderful tool where we can compare my Keys ancestors' most recent confirmed Y-SNP mutation and Gronya's Keys ancestors' most recent confirmed Y-SNP mutation, and see how far back the most recent common male line ancestor of the two Keys families was. If it was in the last 1,000 years, well, then it's likely that the common ancestor was a Keys, but the most recent shared mutation dates back to 3050 BC, 5,000 years ago, maybe before any of our ancestors had come to Ireland. Certainly long before anyone was using any surname, certainly long before any of our ancestors were using a Keys surname. So unfortunately, we're not related in the male line. On the left-hand side, it gives all the more recent mutations that my Keys family has in the first part, and all the more recent mutations that Gronya's family has in the second part, and the third part going back to what we call Y Adam. The only man alive in his day who has direct descendants living today, about 200,000 years ago. Those are all the mutations between 200,000 years ago and 3,000 years ago that the vast majority of the Irish population share with each other, I suppose. Another interesting, the one name tree. This is one of the tree apps done by volunteer programmers. It will pick out everyone on WikiTree with a particular surname. I just put in Keays, but you can put in spelling variants side by side. It will pick out anyone with either of those surnames. So it lists in birth date order all the end of line Keays ancestors currently on WikiTree, and if they have descendants also called Keays or with any variants that you might add later, it will put those in alongside it. There is Jane Frost Keys. I haven't put in her husband yet, but we have her son Thomas Frederick. You just take the little plus to expand, and you have Christopher John and his sister Adelaide and his brother George Augustus. And obviously ends with Adelaide because her children are Ardels. Nobody's added children yet for Christopher or George. And
have any children?
Have any children? Well, that would explain why they're not there. Mary Ann Keys might have a father, but I think that what happened was spelling variants. Or maybe I just haven't her father today. That other table only updates once a week. But the reason that she was Keys, married to Keys, and he's Keys with the second E, so that's why you need to put in the spelling variant to fully exploit this thing. And then down at the end there'll be the people with no dates at the very end. And you can tell it to just concentrate on those from Ireland or those from Limerick or whatever. So it's useful for one name studies. What other ones do I want to look at? Patrick Sarsfield. You're all familiar with the Sarsfield Homecoming Project? Lloyd Guillaume in College, the head of French there, Frenchman, French consul in Limerick, has organised this fundraiser to find the remains of Sarsfield in Belgium. I think they now have found remains and they're trying to extract DNA. Is at the stage where it's at. But the next question is, when we get the DNA, how do we prove that it's Sarsfield's DNA? He's too far back for us to use autosomal DNA, because the chances of any of his present day descendants, his present day great nephews or nieces matching him, are going to be slim because of the dilution of autosomal DNA at every generation. But his Y-DNA and his mitochondrial DNA can be used. So he has a profile on Wikitree. I see any DNA. This is coming and going all day. There's no DNA section. That's a transient bug that I just noticed today, but I don't think he has any DNA connections yet on Wikitree. But what's really nice is we can look for his mitochondrial relatives. So his most distant female line ancestor, his mother's 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 mother, all the way back, from whom he inherited his mitochondrial DNA, was this Welsh woman. Use my Welsh pronunciation, something like Ellen for William Bulkley. And her mitochondrial DNA is inherited by all her children, but only passed on by her daughters. So the first column are her children, the second column are her grandchildren, but only her daughter's children. The third column are her granddaughter's children, fourth column are great-granddaughters. The line has to go through daughters only, but the end of the line can be a man. Who will have the mitochondrial DNA but won't pass it on to his offspring. So we are hoping that this chart might bring us down to somebody of the present day who would, in theory, have the same mitochondrial DNA as Patrick Sarsfield. But unfortunately, the furthest down it comes into the 1650s. There's nobody more recent. But if we do extract mitochondrial DNA from what's been found in Belgium, put it into the family tree DNA database, find living people who share those mitochondrial DNA mutations. Hopefully we can trace them back to this pedigree, which is the foundation for. So Lloyd came to me a few years ago and said, can you trace all the people who might share mitochondrial DNA with Sarsfield? There's going to be millions. Let's wait until we have the DNA and trace back the matches. Be a full-time job for a team of genealogists for several years to trace this pedigree down another 400 years to the present day. But I know no other website that has that feature for laying out mitochondrial relatives like that. All the local gentry are on Wikitree. Here's the Barringtons. The descendants of Joseph Barrington. Was it Matthew who built Clonstall? And many of his descendants down to the present day are in there. Burke's gentry is not considered a reliable source for pre-1700 profiles on Wikitree because it has many errors. So they insist that you use primary sources rather than Burke to document pre-1700 pedigrees. You can put it in with a question mark, yeah. But far more accurate than Ancestry, yeah. But not as accurate as the primary documents. Everybody's found mistakes in Burke, even typos. The O'Grady's are interesting. John O'Grady. The DNA connections for autosomal DNA only propagate back to 0.39%, which is a third cousin once removed, or the equivalent great grandson or granddaughter or whatever. So John has only one descendant showing up as a DNA connection to him. But if we come down the next generation to Standish, there are 3 more down here for a generation further down. And you have links here to go straight to the other websites and run comparisons to see do you match them or not. And Tom Ryan, some of us know, in your class growing in school, was he? So he's another Wikitree fan. He gave a talk somewhere around here, so maybe I'm just repeating what he told you. But he has found his O'Grady ancestors through DNA comparison, because O'Grady with a second family on the side or something, I think, wasn't there? Better. Tom has his own ancestors, so if you're from around Murroe or Newport, you might share some of those ancestors with Tom, and you might find a lot of your cousins are already on Wikitree, and you get. It allows nicknames, yeah. Yeah, Tom goes by Ryan Owen, but he put the surname in as Ryan. So if we go to one of the open profiles, I can just click the edit icon and show you what it allows. You can put in prefix and suffix, but they're discouraged and they're limited in the length, I think, to 10 characters or something. You can give the proper name, the preferred name, other nicknames separated by commas, middle names, but it assumes you run one middle name. Patrick Joseph Martin, all as my proper first name, because I don't want to be Patrick J. Waldron. I'm Patrick J. M. Waldron, but it doesn't understand that people can have more than one middle name. So it's based in America, and there's some American biases. Many last names separated by commas, suffixes, many nicknames that you want to put in there. And you can mark every field as certain or uncertain. You can match dates as certain or uncertain, before or after. Dates. You can add or remove parents, children, spouses, and you can write the biography in plain English if you want, or you can add codes to create footnotes, etc. Or you can just document your sources in a bulleted list at the end. And every time you make a change, you're asked to explain what you've changed, why you've changed it. It saves drafts every so often. And when you're done, you click the full save. It won't let me do a full save because I haven't actually made any changes yet. And it even comes up with suggestions as to what you can do. He hasn't done all the DNA confirmations yet. Doesn't like me closing. Didn't want me to say I hadn't made any changes, but because I've been in edit, it doesn't want me to close the window in case I'm using changes. And there's also another man with local roots, Paul Maloney. That's Paul Senior, Paul Junior. The profile and his ancestors are mostly from around Murroe, Boher, etc. Maloney's, Flynns, Wheatsteads, Bradshaws, Learys, Ryans, Cretons. because it's Tipperary Moor Ryans. So I think I'm kind of out of time. I could talk about stuff, but I think we'll start at this stage. There's lots of further reading there with details of all the other interesting features that you can play with. So go home and look at the link on my website and follow them all yourself. And put up the link again at the top. And I'll put it up on my Facebook page, etc. as well. So if anyone wants to ask me questions so that they're recorded, please use the other microphone.
How much does it cost annually?
There are levels of subscription depending on what features you want, but it's in the hundreds per year.
Yeah. There's also a free access where you can update your family tree, isn't there?
I'm never sure what you can do for free and what you have to pay for it. You can do a little bit for free. Any other questions? Anyone wants their tea and biscuits? Is there anyone? Oh, there's actually 3 people watching. Nobody has typed YouTube that I can see.
Yeah, I've been using MyHeritage, and before that, I think called Brothers Keeper, going back 20 years ago.
Nearly as long as Personal Ancestral File.
Yeah, absolutely. But I've been using MyHeritage now for the last number of years. I find it very good. I suppose, as you say, it has its shortcomings, but then all of them have, like, the one thing there that I see Wikipedia, or the Wiki tree, is that it doesn't allow photographs. Do you know the little thumbnails that
Oh, it does.
Does
it? Yeah.
What does it? Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah, things like that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
That's a photo.
Yeah. I hadn't spotted that.
Ancestors chart. His father was a photograph. Or if you don't have a photograph of the person, you can put up an image of a document. Or I did a biography during Cheltenham Week for the Duchess of Westminster, who owned Arkle, the famous racehorse, and I couldn't find a copyright-free photograph of her. So I put up her racing colours, Arkle's racing colours, as her profile image. No problem adding images. And they have changed the user interface quite dramatically about 2.5 weeks ago. We're slowly getting used to the new one. So you can have as many photographs as you like attached to a profile. And there's now a little carousel where you can just scroll through them. Can't off the top of my head think of one that has multiple photos that we can do that.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
You just mentioned there about the of the lady you mentioned from America, the keys. Cindy.
My cousin, yeah.
Yeah, Cindy, yeah. Well, actually, she solved something for myself, which is from family with a great granduncle who died in Detroit. She sent his Connor's report. You know, very, very interesting. From the paper at the time.
A great researcher.
There was always a question about his suspicion of his death. You know, she proved his suspicion as the saying goes, you know. It was something that
it's always useful to have somebody on the ground and wherever your ancestors emigrated.
My late brother and my niece did an awful lot of work on the family tree, our family tree, and he died a couple of years ago. He kind of, let's say, but all the material is there, only to put it all back together again. When somebody will, you know, when time will come, somebody's going to attack it again. I think my niece is going to work on it. So, as I say, we have a lot to go back. We can go back 6 or so generations. So it isn't too bad, you know. So just a matter
and is it all computerized or
well,
all
I think it's all put together anyway. My niece has it all on
Make sure that
It's all filed.
you have access to the computer files before
Yeah.
the technology changes
Yeah,
again.
well, I think she have it all it's all on print as well. Dennis O'Brien, you mentioned Dennis there. Dennis comes into our Dennis O'Brien Ray. I mean, his family, my mother would be O'Brien, so we go down that line as well.
You'll easily connect yourself.
Yeah, so
in. I didn't actually show you the connection finder, which is the other cute feature. So if we take Paul's profile and select his connection to me, 26 degrees from me in 6 branches. So it goes to his wife through 6 degrees to Winifred Eyre, and when you mouse over, you see it goes all the way to Australia and comes back from Winifred Honan in Clare. Nora Hogan went to Australia from Clare. Her sister stayed in Clare, and her sister married my grandmother. Her daughter married my grandmother's half brother. So it's amazing that there's nobody more than 20 or 30 degrees from most people on Wikipedia.
And there's a Kennedy man in Garavan after coming back from.
Oh, Mark.
Yeah. He seems to be very much involved in.
He is, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
He works closely with Tom Ryan as well.
Yeah. I actually was to meet up with him, but I just didn't chat. Dennis O'Malley would be, he's O'Malley's wife and himself would be first cousins, so I must meet up with him at some stage.
They're all on Wikipedia as well.
Yeah.
The late Brian McMahon said that we're only 20, well, back before 2000, we're only 25 old men away from the year of our Lord. When you work it out, 25 by 80.
25 by. Yeah, but more than 25 generations. In terms of knowing each other and meeting each other or whatever. Yeah.
A man, St. Thomas of Calan, who lived up to 1970, knew a man in 1798.
You knowing each other rather than through direct descent.
Oh, yeah.
Actually, I said there's very few people in Wikitree more than 30 degrees apart, but if you go back to St. Patrick, that's 55 generations or something, so there's nobody alive closer than 55 degrees from St. Patrick. The same, well, Boher is about 30. Probably everybody in Ireland today, because we're probably all descended from Brian Boher. We all had 2 parents, 4 grandparents, 8 great-grandparents, 16 great-great-grandparents. Like 10 generations, you're up to 1,000. About 20 generations, you're up to 1,000 by 1,000, a million. 30 generations, 1,000 million, a billion slots in your family tree. There would be a few billion in the world today. There was a lot less than a billion in the world 1,000 years ago, and a hell of a lot less in Ireland. So,
Father had an expression, and you said, related. We are, but a greyhound wouldn't catch it.
exactly.
Can you find are you able to find lost relations using Wikitree? Is it a search engine as such?
It's a search engine. Yeah, there's a little search icon up there, and there's an advanced search. You can search in fields you want: names, dates, places, relationships.
Okay.
There's only 40 million people in there. There's been a lot more than 40 million people have lived in the world. So
Okay.
this part of the country seems pretty well represented on it.
Yeah, I just created an account there now, Alex.
While we were talking.
Yeah, the family
Good,
one. Yeah.
good.
So I'm just going to try and search around and see can I find
Did
relations.
you find any of your own relations there already?
And that's where you find them in that search.
My search box, yeah.
Cool.
Thank you very much for coming. Thank you very much for listening. Thank you, Grania, for organising it.
The family with the post generations, this parish is 11, I think. Noonan family. They live in Genealogy, one house.
One house. That's the
So the
amazing.
one farmyard,
Yeah.
no, not the one house, no, the one farmyard. That's a fair bit of.
Fair bit of history. Keys family wouldn't be far off that, would it? So, yeah.
To say clogs to clogs in three, that's what they say. Clogs back to clogs. You know, the family died out in 3 generations. One clog made it, the other clog kept it, the other clog spent it.
Spent it, exactly. Yeah.
Okay, Paddy, thank you very much.
Thanks for coming.